Yes, an updated version of this video will be re-uploaded when Overwatch 2 comes out on October 4th alongside the 8-hour version of this video. I just don't expect this video to do very well because nobody wants to learn about heroes in a game that's going from 6v6 to 5v5. I'll leave the Reddit write-up down below, which will be about 7,000 words, so if you could upvote that Reddit post and share this video around, that'd be great. Without further ado, here's how to play every Overwatch 1 hero in roughly 50 to 60 seconds. The 60-second D.Va guide. With boosters, try to off-angle on high ground to put pressure past the enemy Ryan shield and to be able to see what abilities you want to eat with your defense matrix, such as nade or flashbang follow-up. Try to also mark DPS who off-angle so that they don't get free value from afar and don't take too much damage before the fight actually begins, as you'll be unable to off-angle. Also, due to your very harsh damage fall-off, try to play between 5 and 15 meters away from the enemy team. Building on positioning a bit more, when you're playing dive or poke dive mirrors, try to position in between your backline and your frontline so you're able to peel for your backline, but to also follow up for whenever your ball slams. Also in brawl mirrors, look to coordinate dives with the Lucio onto the enemy backline to force things like lamp, as you're seeing in the background with the team that I coached. With micro missiles, ensure you have it for when you off angle instead of using it off cooldown whenever, although you can use micro missiles early to gain extra ult charge. With bomb, try not to bomb engage as you'll be left without a defense matrix whilst your team are pushing in. Instead, look to play very aggressively and then bomb to remech or to use it in the mid fight when there are fewer abilities to eat. The 60-second Orisa guide. With fusion drivers, try to actually lead and land your shots to gain more ult charge. However, when retreating, consider not shooting to retreat faster due to the 30% movement speed penalty when shooting. With halts, look to combo them with your abilities, look to pull enemies out of cover, and to keep distance when kiting against close range brawl comps. With your shield, use the acronym ATP to help remember these 3 key aspects to shield usage. The A stands for angle, meaning to correctly angle your shield so there aren't any gaps past your shield. Time your shield for when either team engages, as you don't want to start the fight with your shield on cooldown. If you're defending, you can effectively triple your shield HP by placing down a shield first, shooting one in the air, and then shooting another shield down during the mid-fight. The P stands for placement. Ask whether you want to aggressively or defensively shield, depending on what your team do.
We see the rest of Mayhem. Are they set up for aggression on this corner? Not really, right? So is OGE going to get value with this aggressive shield? No, he's not.
Use Fortify under heavy pressure, and with Supercharger, place it around corners just before the fight begins. The 60-second Reinhardt guide. Make sure to turn your camera in the direction of your swing in order to increase the size of your hitbox, and to fire strike after your first swing in order to do more damage in a shorter period of time. With your shield, don't waste too much shield before the fight begins, as you'll be less likely to block key cooldowns and ultimates, and shield hop to be more efficient with your shield resource unless you're playing against snipers. Make sure you're also taking space or kiting back when you're shielding, instead of just standing still being a shield bot. With Shatter, play dirty, meaning utilize abilities from your teammates such as Flashbang, Maywall, or Speed Amp to land shatters past the enemy Ryan shield directly or by putting pressure onto the Ryan. With positioning, ensure you have a corner to pivot around, including in the mid-fight in order to stabilize, and consider aggressively turning that corner to put the enemy team in open space. Also look to clear high ground instead of barreling down main, such as the Dorado example in the background, so you not only prevent from being shot by a million different angles, but to also give your DPS the ability to shoot the enemy from a million different angles. The 60-second Roadhog guide. With your scrap gun primary fire, look to optimize your crosshair placement via placing it at the neck to head height to land as many pellets as possible to both the head and the body. Also, look to not panic your shots in close quarter combat. You also want to hold slightly longer sightlines over short sightlines despite having a shotgun, as Spilo details here.
There's the hooks that you can threaten soldier and back, and what they have to do to dislodge you is very awkward. They have to go all the way up the stairs.
To build on that, Hog is favoured in narrow spaces to easily land hooks alongside having 8 to 20 meters of distance, as a secondary fire is optimal at 8 meters to land those satisfying shots. The enclosed room by Oasis City Centre is a good example of this. With Hook, the most important thing is the one-shot combo, which is to fire a shot, walk forward, throw the hook, keep moving, and follow up with a primary fire plus melee. With Breather, use it as a failsafe when flanking and under heavy pressure, and with Whole Hog, look to solo ult a target, typically a main tank such as Reinhardt, and to look to deny close range ultimates such as Nanoblade or Blossom if you haven't got Hook. The 60-second Sigma guide. With your hyperspheres, the most important aspect is to utilize these from distanced off angles rather than just shooting shields. Your raw DPS is only 74, so shield break isn't a priority. With your shield, don't forget to retract it when you or a teammate aren't using it, shield dance against mobile DPS heroes by weaving on either side of the shield, and don't use shield to block irrelevant spam damage. This means that when you're at an off angle, don't immediately deploy your shield, but rather deploy it once you start taking meaningful damage. With Kinetic Grasp, there are 2 main uses: to either use it preemptively when you know you're going to eat a ton of spam damage, or reactively aggressively, such as eating a Death Blossom. With your accretion, again, there are two uses. Utilize it as a failsafe to defend yourself when being dove, or to use it to disable certain abilities or ultimates, or to force someone out of a good position. With Flux, you can use it to kite against Brawl comps, to deal with Nanoblade, or to deal mass damage to squishy targets while shooting them. There is some secret Sigma tech where you can land enemies on top of your head, as you're seeing with Octotroph in the background, which is used to counter Bap's lamp. The 60-second Winston guide. With Tesla Cannon, you don't always want to be upfront and close with the enemy team, as you won't be able to utilize the cleave from your Tesla Cannon. More generally speaking, you want to position yourself that you end up shooting the enemy backline rather than the front line. Here's Spilo detailing 3 layers of this on Umbani.
Level 1 monkeys do this. It's frontline. 2, my team can't see it. Level 2 monkey does this. Can my team see this kill box? Yes, you're shooting tanks and you're frontlining. This is level 3. I will drop off. I'll see Ryan Shield get to about there, and then jump, and it's all squishies.
With your jump pack, learn your short and long jumps by controlling your WASD keys if you're on PC, or thumbsticks if you're on controller. Obviously melee before you land to get extra burst damage. Set up on high ground or walk to the enemy team to save your jump to escape. With bubble, look to bubble dance in between your shield, look to block CC when diving in with your bubble, and avoid diving without bubble. With primal, look to juggle enemies one-on-one, and jump out at the very last second as your jump pack refreshes at the end of primal. The 60-second Wrecking Ball guide. With your weapon, make sure to have good trigger discipline, especially in close quarter combat, by adjusting your aim without shooting so you don't dump an entire clip into thin air. Melee in between to land more damage. With grapple, please don't just grapple main and slam into the enemy team, as it's very telegraphed and you can be easily stunned. Instead, look to path from angles and flanks, and if you're getting forced out from your angles or flanks, try and get another flanker to come and help you. With your pile driver, don't just use it whenever. Up against comps like Hog, McCree, Brig, look to just do fast roll throughs, and your slam should be way more opportunistic. If you are going to slam into CC, you better have follow up, and this leads me onto your adaptive shields. If going into CC, you need to pop your adaptive shields early, as you won't have time later on when you're stunned, and if you're not going into CC, but you are rolling through 5 or 6 people, you should use your shields to gain a ton of HP and poke from range until you can go back in. With mines, just simply use them when the enemy team engage, so your team can follow up. The 60-second Zarya guide. With your beam, there are 3 main things. First, at medium to longer ranges, interweave your beam with your ult fire to increase your DPS. Secondly, when dueling, open with a right click first for burst damage and a slight bit of CC, then use your beam, and then use a right click at the end. The final thing, which sounds really obvious but is a really common mistake, is to stop reloading after you fire 1 or 2 shots. With your bubbles, try and get 80 charge at the start of the game, and then use your projected bubble to help cycle your charge between 60 and 100s. To help you do this, you want to be bubbling aggression from your team or from the enemy team. When you're at decent charge, you want to use your personal bubble like a failsafe when you play too aggressively. In essence, play aggressively with personal bubble, and if you get dove, you can use personal as a get out of jail free card similar to flashbang. In terms of peeling with bubble, it's niche, so don't put your full focus into it. Examples of good peeling bubbles would be when you have some charge and you bubble your support from the Nano Winston and your Brig peels. With grav, just make sure your team has follow up and grav corners if needed. The 60-second Ashe guide. With your primary fire, you want to be holding longer sight lines and ensuring you reload in between fights and when you're rotating to different positions in order to maximize uptime. The only time you should be spamming out shots is in close quarter combat to increase DPS and survivability with a higher movement speed. With Coach Gun, there are 2 main uses. The first is to reposition to high ground, and the second is to escape from dive heroes. There's another quite niche use, which is to use it like a poor man's Widow grapple to get an unorthodox angle on the enemy team. With Dynamite, look to deploy it and detonate it on the enemy backline from an angle, and make sure it's timed for when your team can follow up. Also throw it at spawn doors for easy ult charge. As you're technically a sniper, here are a few advantages and factors you should consider when taking a duel. Peek is advantage, high ground advantage, fall off advantage, pocket advantage, infrasight advantage, and most importantly, repositional advantage, which is where you reposition at a different angle so you catch the enemy DPS off guard. With Bob, just place it on the enemy backline or force point. The 60-second Bastion guide. There's nothing really special to your primary fire other than to use it to win flanks and to use it on preferably longer sightlines against most heroes, as you don't want to be in turret form at close ranges. Speaking of turret form, you should late peek an angle rather than stacking main behind your shield or flanking too early. By flanking too early, you're likely to get forced out by a hero with more range, such as a Hanzo, or by a hero with more mobility, such as a Tracer, hence you need to late peek. Think of your turret form like a spike in value. Very powerful once you're in it, but after you get a kill, you need to leave. With your self-heal, just use it when taking damage on an angle in order to continuously put pressure from that angle. A good marker for when you should heal is when all your armor depletes. Your ultimate is probably one of the most misunderstood and underrated abilities in this entire game. Please use it on angles or on duels to one-shot squishies and not down main, otherwise you might as well be in turret form. Here's also a Symmetra Bastion TP strat I made for my low Grandmaster team, which works pretty well. The 60-second Cassidy guide. With your Peacekeeper, make sure to utilize your range up against short-ranged comps, even at the expense of fall-off damage, in order to consistently put out damage rather than being forced out too early. With Fan the Hammer, just use it after your flashbang due to the reliability. Exceptions would be against low HP, squishy heroes, such as Tracer, or if you don't have many bullets left in your clip. With Flashbang, think of it as a failsafe. Most of the time, you don't want to actively seek for value with Flashbang, but rather use it as a defense mechanism for when you get dove at close ranges. Exceptions would be some set plays, such as flashing the enemy Reinhardt so your Rein can land a shatter. Flashbang is similar to your role as well. Many players often waste this ability when trying to get to an angle, but once they need to escape, their role is left on cooldown. With High Noon, there are two main uses. The first is more team oriented, which is to zone space to allow your tanks to push up and to allow your team to take high grounds. The second is more individual, which is to do late flanks with your High Noon into the mid fight, since in the mid fight, there shouldn't be many cooldowns left to stop you. The 60-second Doomfist guide. I'll start with the two main combos to note. The first is to slam, uppercut, shoot, and punch out. This is used against large clumps of enemies or when you don't have a wall to punch against. The second is to drop punch from high ground, using your uppercut and slam to escape. This is normally used against high CC comps, and it's easy to stun Doomfist when he's slamming. Make sure to try and slam back to high ground so you have an angle to initiate from, such as this example on King's Row. Speaking of slam, there are two types of slams. The target slam, where you have a blue indicator, and a ground slam, where there is no indicator. The target slam is quicker, but deals less damage, meaning you want to use this if you think you're going to get stunned. If you have a Zarya bubble, however, you can be more greedy and get away with the ground slam. There's also diagonal punches, bounce jumps, and rollouts you can do with your punch alone. I recommend watching these videos in the description for more details. With your ults, just use it to escape or recharge your abilities to keep going in. Lastly, if you're playing up against mobile heroes such as Tracer, flank late and don't flank too early, otherwise you'll get forced out and become a punch bot down main. The 60-second Echo Guide. With your stickies, make sure to have them for when either team engages, and aim to combo them with other abilities such as Halt and Pile Driver. With Flight, use natural cover such as roofs or slopes to maximize airtime and to break LOS in case you take too much damage. You can also perform an aerial assassination by either flying to the skybox and landing stickies with your beam on a squishy hero, or doing the same combo by dashing out of cover with your Flight. You should also treat high ground like a helipad, finishing your flight on high ground, ideally on a decent angle, allowing you to fly in the air for longer for your next flight, whilst also being safer, dealing more damage from angles.
Here and here are places that you can end, where you have escape paths, you have cover that you can duck behind and use.
In Echo duels, whoever uses flight first are at a bigger disadvantage, as they will land back on the ground first, meaning if you use flight second, you'll be on top of the enemy Echo, making shots easier to land. With beam, it's not too complicated, just beam low HP enemies or low Rein shield. With your ultimate, most of the time, you either want to duplicate an immobile hero such as Sigma or Orisa and pressure from a really aggressive off angle, or you just duplicate Rein, Doom or Tracer and barrel straight into the enemy team. The 60-second Genji guide. With your primary fire, obviously use secondary fire in short range and your primary fire at longer ranges, but on a broader level, you want to use them to poke out and control high ground from short to mid ranges. With dash, on a broader level, you want to either use it for mobility or to confirm a kill that you know you're going to get, so you can dash straight out. In a slightly more coordinated environment, make sure your dashes are well timed with your team, and that after you aggressively dash, you have some escape or cover to use. On a micro level, you can do a ghost dash, commonly used in Dragon Blade to quickly move from target to target, and you can one-shot a squishy by firing a fan of shurikens with a melee straight after your dash. With deflect, just use it in duels to give you an advantage. With blade, make sure it's well timed. You don't always need nano boost, as if your tanks buy you enough attention, you'll get away with more aggressive blades. With Genji, you have two main playstyles, Duelist or Follow-Up. Duelist requires the enemy team to have glass cannon type heroes such as Hanzo, Widow, Ashe, Zen, and Follow-Up requires a bit more coordination with your team's aggression, particularly in dive. The 60-second Hanzo guide. With your bow, ideally you want to play slightly longer angles but not too far that it becomes too hard to hit shots and that you won't be able to make full use of your storm arrows. Speaking of which, don't just storm arrow shields. Pop them after you fire your first shot on an angle to very quickly kill a squishy or to burst down a tank. You can also use them to force and win duels against other squishy heroes, so don't waste it burning down enemy shield. With Sonic Arrow, you want to Sonic flanks before you take them. For example, on Oasis University, by using Sonic on the right hand side, you can tell if there's a Cassidy or a Hog, in which case you don't take the flank. If nobody's there though, don't think your Sonic is a waste, as you can then take that angle. With Lunge and Wall Climb, just save Lunge to escape, and use Wall Climb to get to certain angles which are safer but more aggressive, as Spilo gives an example of here.
And now we're sitting on the floor. This is so much safer and more aggressive up here. Other heroes wish they could wall climb up here and utilize this, and yet you're here. And now you're there, and now you're in spawn.
Lastly, with Dragon Strike, use it to either split the enemy team and push in, or to zone and take space. The 60-second Junkrat guide. With your primary fire, you want to ideally control short sightlined angles and areas, ideally in enclosed spaces. For example, the stairs on Blizzard World's second point attack can easily be spammed from safety, alongside the infamous hotel on King Zo's first point. With your concussion mine, there are two main uses. The first is for mobility, to either kite and escape danger, or to enable yourself to get into a better position. Of course, you can double or even triple conk mine your way from spawn. The second use is for lethality, particularly the two-shot combo, which acts as a Walmart flashbang, meaning you can use it defensively to allow you to peel for yourself if you do get dove upon. With trap, it's pretty simple. Place it on the corner of flank so the enemy flanker doesn't see the trap until the very last moment, and in terms of which flank you should place it on the most commonly used flank. On Rialto first point defense, for example, that will be the short flank adjacent to the corner. With Riptire, just use it to get a singular pick, run the tire against a wall, or ride it across roofs to make less sound and to make the tire more unpredictable. In reality, your tire should at worst get a single pick unless the enemy team have immortality field. The 60-second Mei guide. With primary fire, just make sure you have a full clip before the fight begins and that you use your freeze against close range wall heroes such as Reinhardt and Reaper to prevent them from closing the distance. With your ice wall, there are 5 main uses that I denote in the acronym TLVCS. The T stands for timing, just make sure that you wall when your team can follow up. The L stands for line of sight, wall an enemy to block line of sight onto their team or to prevent them from escaping. The V stands for verticality, look for quirky walls to boost yourself and your team to high ground. If available, use the payload as well. The C stands for clearing, specifically clearing the enemy Mei. Look to wall in front of the Mei to speed past choke. For example, on King 2nd, you wall in front of their Mei to then move past archway. The S stands for splitting or stacking, in reference to your positioning, specifically on chokes. If you're hard holding a choke, play split as it's more aggressive, but if you're planning to kite from the choke, play stacked. With Mace Cryo, just use it under pressure or to bait CC, and with Mace Blizzard, use it in an area where your team can follow up, i.e. your kill box, or to just secure a kill onto one enemy. The 60-second Pharah guide. With boosters, the key mechanic is fuel management, and treating high ground as your helipad to regen your fuel. You want to tap your fuel in slow, methodical pulses in order to gain some of it back over time and to not waste it. With Concussive Blast, of course you can use it to try and get environmental kills or to boop enemies off high ground, but a very underrated use is to use it to initiate duels, as I'll get onto later. With Barrage, of course fire a rocket just before you barrage to just squeeze in some more extra damage, and look to time barrage in the mid-fight when there are less cooldowns to stop you. In terms of playstyle, you have two options. The first is the most simple, spamming chokes from angles, often behind cover or roofs. The second playstyle is more complex, which is to act as a two-shot duelist, using your concussion mine or boosters to get into close range to land 2 rockets on a squishy. Normally, you'll go from the first to second playstyle as a teamfight develops. To help make this more specific, you ideally want to be rotating from corner to corner, usually getting more aggressive. For example, on Blizzard World's second point, you're always using cover available to you, ready to pounce and initiate a duel. The 60-second Reaper guide. With your shotguns, ensure you have good trigger discipline, meaning that you take some time in between your shots to line up your crosshair so that you're not just firing into thin air. With Wraith, use it as a free get out of jail card when you get too aggressive on a flank or you're losing a duel. You can also use them to juke cooldowns such as Flashbang, but be wary that you won't have any escape. With Shadow Step, use it to access high ground or cheeky flanks, refer to the playstyle section later. With your Blossom, fire a shot just before you pop the ultimate, use it in the mid-fight when there are less cooldowns to stun you, and try avoid using Blossom on the front line. With your playstyle, there are mainly two options, frontline or flanker. With frontline, you ideally want to take soft off angles and look to deter off tanks such as Zarya, Sigma or Hog in particular from taking angles. With the flanker playstyle, it's pretty formulaic. Look to use your Shadow Step aggressively into the enemy backline or into a greedy flank in the mid-fight, and look to 2, 3 or 4 shot the enemy squishies. Ensure you time this a bit later into the mid-fight when your tanks are drawing attention and there are less cooldowns to stop you, in order to make your flank extra effective. The 60-second Soldier guide. With your weapon, the key things to keep in mind are to maintain longer sight lines unless you're going against snipers, and to have good trigger discipline, meaning that you take some time in between your shots to readjust your crosshair. With your sprint, it's very linked to your playstyle. You essentially want to use your sprint to quickly make mid-fight rotations so you can get a cheeky angle on the enemy team, as Jayne briefly gives an example of here on Eichenwald first point defense.
And you've got sprint, so you can actually do this. If you, instead of kind of like meeting their attack here, push in behind them and like play a ring around the rosy, you pincer them.
With Helix, the uses are twofold, for lethality and mobility. For lethality, you normally want to finish off your kills with Helix, unless you're going against an enemy with armor or a stationary enemy which you can easily land a direct Helix on. For mobility, you can do Helix rocket jumps, such as the one in the background. With Visor, just use it when you're taking an angle as you normally would. And with your playstyle, you want to be utilizing your sprint to do hard flanks from range, playing as a hybrid between hit scan such as Cassidy and flankers such as Tracer. The 60-second Sombra guide. With your Uzi, keep range on your enemies. You are the best range flanker in the game, so if you're playing Sombra for damage, you might as well be playing Tracer. Ensure you also have cover to maximize your uptime when farming EMP. With invisibility, nothing complicated. Just use it to quickly get into position to farm from a soft off angle or to get an angle onto the enemy backline. With Translocator, you ideally want to place it where you're both safe but can still contribute to the fight relatively quickly. For example, on the Pool Shrine, you ideally want to place your Translocator on point B. This is because you can still contribute to the fight and drop down to C if need be, whereas you're immediately out of the fight if you choose either A or C. Not to mention, translocating to point A doesn't give you a good angle either. With your EMP, just make sure to use it when your team can actually follow up. And with your playstyle, this would shift depending on what comp you're up against. Look to take soft off angles to farm EMP from range, and then start taking deeper angles when the brawl team start losing some resources. Against Poke, however, as they have more range, you'll be looking to play more like a Tracer and set up dives on the backline. The 60-second Symmetra guide. With your beam, you want to live in the mid-fight to build your level 3 charged beam to melt the enemy team. With your alternate fire, in a 1v1, you ideally want to start off with a fully charged orb for some quick burst damage, or you'll mostly be spamming them at range to build ult charge. With your turrets, you'll mostly spread them out around a choke. However, a highly underrated use is to use them to mark flanks. This can alert you of flankers such as Tracer and can soften them up before they engage. Alternatively, you can also use them for TP bombs, as I'll get onto now. With your teleporter, referring to TP bombs, this is simply placing a few turrets stacked on top of each other on a surface, then placing your teleporter on top of them to the enemy backline, and then fully charging your right click to quickly explode a 200 HP squishy, as shown by the possible Kingzor example. With your photon barrier, the uses are twofold. Firstly, use the barrier aggressively by splitting the enemy team with a vertical wall. The other wall is more defensive, where you place it horizontally in front of you. This is most useful if you want to keep space or reacting to ults, such as Bomb or High Noon. The 60-second Torbjörn guide. You of course want to use your shotgun and CQC and your left clicks from afar for general spam damage. The biggest skill curve for Torb is the weird projectile nature of his left click, so I recommend practicing in workshop codes or in comp games to get better. With your overload, the main use is for defensive purposes. When a Doomfist slams onto you, or when their Winston jumps onto you, overload is specifically built to make you bulkier and more lethal. Alternatively, in situations where there are no flankers on the enemy team, you can use overload like Hanzo's Storm Arrow, giving you more firepower when taking an angle or dueling an enemy squishy. With your turret, there are two main uses, which are similar to overload. The defensive use is to plant your turret on certain flanks to land some damage on flankers, to make it easier to duel heroes such as Tracer. Alternatively, the offensive use is to plant your turret on off angles to gain extra ult charge. This type of turret should be done when there are few flank threats from the enemy team, or there are few dive threats. With your ultimate, either use it to block off and zone potential flanks and angles the enemy team could use, or just use it to punish the enemy team's dive. The 60-second Tracer guide. With your primary fire, the most important detail is trigger discipline. Just readjust your crosshair throughout your clip so you don't dump a clip into thin air. With blinks, you want to utilize terrain and cover to recharge your blinks, and generally speaking, you always want to have roughly 1.5 blinks available. Also, avoid using too many blinks to get to your engagement and look to reload during your blinks. With recall, this is of course to use when you get pressured too much, but a key tip is to not use it unnecessarily. A very common example is just after you pulse bomb. Look to land pulse bombs on squishy heroes if possible, but if you are less experienced with pulse bomb, don't be afraid to use it on tanks. Just make sure your team can actually follow up on it. With timing, of course you want to time pressure when your team pressures. However, a very underrated tip is to time pressure half a second after either team engages. This is because the enemy team will be focused on your team, making your engage more potent. With playstyle, there are two main options. You can mirror the enemy flankers, which is preferable if you have supports like Brig Zen, or you can go straight for the enemy team's backline, which is preferable if you have pulse bomb, or if the enemy team have low CC. The 60-second Widowmaker guide. With your weapon, of course aim is important, but so are numerous advantages you need to take into account when deciding to force a sniper duel, such as infosight advantage, pocket advantage, high ground advantage, peekers advantage, jump shot advantage, which I'll elaborate more in the grapple section, distraction advantage, meaning that your team are distracting the enemy sniper, which is done by just having good timing on your engages, and repositional advantage, meaning that you reposition to a different angle to catch the opposing sniper off guard. Your crosshair placement also needs to be head high, placed on the corner of which the enemy sniper is peeking from. With your SMG, use it in close quarter combat only. Going for the headshot close up is too risky considering your movement speed is significantly reduced. With your Venom Mine, use it to mark flanks obviously. Don't underrate its use combined with your SMG if you do get dove. With Grapple, obviously use it to get to high grounds, but you can also use it as an advantage in a duel by utilizing jump shots. This makes it significantly harder for the enemy to hit you, but your aim should be relatively unaffected. With Infosight, just use it as soon as a fight begins and avoid wasting it after a fight. The 60-second Honor Guide. With your biotic rifle, you ideally want to be hip firing as much as possible since it gives you a wider POV, allowing you to be more aware, but if you're obviously at range, or if you want to quick scope a small moving hitbox, zooming in for the hit scan shot is fine. Ideally, try not to stay scoped for more than 5 shots, especially considering your reliability to both snipers and flankers with that reduced movement speed. With your sleep dart, you'll mainly be using this defensively. Think of sleep dart as a fail-safe, just like Orisa's Fortify or Cassidy's Flashbang when things go wrong. There will also be moments where you will need to save sleep to prevent ultimates, such as Blossom or Barrage. With Biotic Nade, please try and use this on off angles as much as possible and try to use this aggressively in comparison to your sleep dart. So many low-level honors waste their nade by using it to compensate for their aim, where they could take a cheeky off angle when their team are engaging to land a massive purple. The key is to time your off angle nades when your team are pressuring. With Nano Boost, you'll most likely be using this to enable aggression, whether that be a Winston diving or a Reinhardt pushing, but feel free to use Nano Boost defensively and to quickly revert pressure. The 60-second Baptiste Guide. With your gun, you want to interweave your heal nades and your hit scan shots. You should ideally be firing 1 heal nade and 2 3-shot bursts. If you need to focus on healing more and landing those direct nades, then I recommend only doing 1 burst of shots or straight up healing, but this should only be a last resort if you're missing your heal shots and or your team are on critical HP. With your regen burst, just use it when your tanks are under heavy pressure and need the extra healing. This has a short 10-meter radius, so make sure that when you actually use it, you're in range of your teammates. With your immortality field, toss it around corners obviously, and it's better to have a slightly early field than to have one that's slightly late, as normally late fields end up in dead teammates. Sometimes you can do aggressive fields if, for example, you know your Reinhardt loves to pin. With Exo Boots, just use it to get to high ground or to evade projectile flankers. Avoid pogo jumping in general due to snipers. With your Matrix, either use it to zone and take space, particularly high grounds, use it to boost the damage your DPS do, or you yourself can become the DPS and use it independently on a juicy off angle. The 60-second Brigitte Guide. With your flail, this will be your main method of gaining Inspire. I'll expand more on brawling with Brig throughout. With Whipshot, try to hit enemies who will try and take off angles to predominantly get your Inspire off. Against jumping Winstons, look to either Whipshot them midair to force their bubble, or to bash away and Whipshot after he lands. With your bash, please use it for mobility. You're simply too squishy to go for aggressive stuns most of the time, unless your team is helping you. On some maps, you can do shield bash jumps, although this is quite niche. With Rally, use it 3 seconds before engaging, or you can use it in reaction to a dive. With playstyle, in comps where you don't have to peel as much, you want to look to threaten short sight-lined off angles. On Dorado First Point, for example, you could easily threaten the angle on top of the marketplace. You're not necessarily going to kill anyone, but at least threaten them, waste time, and guard the off angle from being used. Using Rally or having a Sigma or DPS here would also be great. In comps where you do have to peel more, such as Brig Zen, look to clear flankers when they engage, and then you can both push up and rotate as one to look to brawl a bit more. The 60-second Lucio Guide. With your weapon, just practice the projectiles and workshop codes to aid your dueling capability and your ability to land shots to gain more ult charge. With wall riding, in general, you want to be able to wall ride to high grounds, jump in between your wall rides to give you an extra speed boost, and also act as if the floor is lava most of the time. I do recommend checking out the Lucio subreddit for further advice. With your crossfade, it's actually more simple than you think. If your team isn't engaging or disengaging from a fight, you should be on heals. It's essentially free ult charge if you're on heals, whilst your team is poking. With your sonic amplifier, as a general rule of thumb, you want to heal amp if 2 or more of your teammates are on critical HP, and speed amp if your team is disengaging from a long distance. Individually, when taking duels, you can interweave both speed and heal to make your movement more elusive, and amp will obviously amplify this. With boop, obviously look for environmental kills, but when wall riding, also look to boop enemy DPS off high ground, and enemy tanks into or away from your team. With Sound Barrier, aside from the obvious uses, you can pop it mid-fight in case you're down cooldowns such as Lamp, and hide from EMP to beat afterwards. The 60-second Mercy Guide. You should primarily be damage boosting targets who are aggressing. This means that you don't just pocket your DPS. For example, if your Cassidy is playing passive but your Hog is pushing in, you would damage boost your Hog. Damage boost is extremely underrated and can change breakpoints which win fights without you even realizing. With your Guardian Angel or GA, obviously learn tech such as Super Jump, which is done by crouching and using GA at the same time, then jumping at the end. However, you also need to learn when to not use GA, as GA can put yourself in danger, and you might actually need to use GA to escape, but you won't be able to if you constantly waste the cooldown. With Res, aim to Res at the last second, Res around corners, and learn to Super Jump Res as Mercy creator Honor details here.
To Super Jump Res, you will need to time your jump a little earlier, around level 3 so you don't have enough vertical momentum to break the Res, but enough to keep you off the ground and fall when you revive your teammates, making it a lot harder for enemies to hit you or stun you.
With Valkyrie, just pop it at the start of fights and when you're up or down a player. This can quicken the fight or prolong it enough for a 6v6 respectively. The 60-second Moira guide. I'll start off splitting Biotic Grasp into healing and damage. Resource management is your main priority. Know when to tap or to continually use your spray depending on healing demands from your team, and be aware of your resource bar. With damage, use it when you're low on spray and quickly tap it to gain back the spray more quickly, and look for opportunities to damage when healing is going out, such as Sound Barrier. With Biotic Orb, again, I'll split it into damage and healing. With Healing Orb, you'll likely be using this more of the time the more coordinated of play you get. Use it at the start of fights when either team engages, or when you or your team are low HP. With Damage Orb, use it when your team are very healthy and or you have a numbers advantage, allowing you to be more aggressive. Also pop it 8 seconds before the fight begins for extra ult charge. With Fade, just use it when you're pressured and don't waste it. Look for Moira jumps where possible. R/Moira rollouts may help. With Coalescence, use your orb before you Coalescence and look to rush a target on the ground or to pressure an aerial target. If you're low in resource, this can be a solid way to get it back as well. The 60-second Zenyatta guide. With your weapon, you want to maximize your uptime on your primary fire, and you want to be as close as possible whilst being safe. With your ult fire, you want to charge it whilst you're closing distance, timing the release as you peek around cover. With orbs, simply put, you want to orb aggression from either team respectively. More specifically, you want to orb flanks in order to control flankers, ideally placed on squishier heroes. For instance, on Bastion Sanctuary, using both orbs on a duel taking place by coast can give your tracer the upper hand. With your ult, its usage is quite flexible. You'll usually use it defensively when getting dove or to counter an ultimate, but you can also use it aggressively to force a brawl. Make sure to use both orbs before ulting. With positioning, there are 4 key rules, which are cover, line of sight, rotational options, and distance from angles. Here's an example on Havana's second point attack, where you have cover, good lines of sight onto both teams, you can rotate more aggressively or defensively, and you have enough distance from flankers to react to them in time.